Ellipses and hyperbolas look almost identical with one major exception. One of those is a negative. And in this case, the foci is the square root of the sum of those, so they're going to check which is bigger and which is smaller. So we have to do a few things here, a few things to label. So I look at the first problem, and it's asking, I'm going to start with an example again. I know that's not traditional, but that's how we're going to do it. Sketch the graph of the hyperbola, labeling the vertices, foci, and asymptotes. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. It's kind of like an ellipse, kind of, in the sense of you look at what's underneath x, 16. So you stretch what? What is square to get 16? 4. You move 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. What is square to get 4? 2. And here what you do, you actually, instead of creating the ellipse, you create a rectangular box. You take two lines and you run the two lines through the edges of the box. They must pass through the middle. That's always going to happen. Those are the asymptotes they're asking about. Now, you look at the problem and you notice there's a negative in front of the y. That means there's nothing across the y-axis. The graph is two parabolas pointing in opposite direction, and in this case, since there's nothing along the y-axis, they start at the edge of this box and they head toward the asymptote. So that's where the hyperbola comes from, the name. So we have center is at 0, 0. They're not asking about center, but you know. Vertices is always on the side that's not negative. So it is 4, 0 and negative 4, 0. We got the vertices. The foci is going to be along the x-axis, obviously, because that's where the graph is. And if I take the square root of 16 plus 4, that's radical 20. That's a number bigger than 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, but less than 5. It's right there. And it's right there. So that is radical 20 or 2 radical 5. Now the equation for the asymptotes is y equal plus or minus, and it's very simple. mx. M is the slope. The slope is going to always be rise over 1. That will never change. Rise over 1. So regardless how the graph opens up, what do you square to get 4 at 2? What do you square to get 16? So that's plus or minus 1/2 x. That's the equation for this line and this line. So these are the main properties that they want us to label. The vertices, if I look at the next problem, the vertices, well, let's see how that works. I'm going to stretch 3 in the x, 1 in the y, make sure that's a 1 as well. That's the key. Instead of creating an ellipse, I'm going to create a rectangular box. 2 lines running through the edges of this box. They will always pass through the origin. If they don't, that means your scale is way off. Alright, so need to label a few things. The center is at 0, 0. They're not asking for that. The vertices, well, do you see there's a negative in front of the x? So it's along the y-axis. That's how you determine which way the graph opens up. It has nothing to do with anything else. So the vertices are 0, 1, and 0, negative 1. The foci must be on the y-axis. And the foci we find by taking the square root of 9 plus 1. That's radical 10. A number bigger than 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So radical 10 and negative radical 10. Now the asymptotes are fairly simple to do. Ly equal plus or minus rise over 1. That's always the case. The rise is always going to be the y, no matter which way the graph opens up. And the run is going to be always the x. What do you square to get a 1? 1. What do you square to get a 9? 3. There it is. Done deal. I think it's fairly simple. If you don't believe me, just try a few problems and you'll get the hang of this. It's not as bad as it looks. So, 2 more of those. We're going to really apply those heavy when we apply the shifts. That's why we're not doing many of those and there isn't as much homework really. So here I want to make that a 1. X squared over 4 minus y squared over 16 equal a 1. So I start 2 in the x, 4 in the y, create the rectangular box. Again, it has nothing to do which of those is bigger. It has to do where's the negative. The negative is in front of the y. There's nothing along the y-axis. So you draw 2 lines passing through the edges of this rectangle. The graph must be wrapped around the x-axis because there's a negative in front of the y. There it is. So the center is at 0, 0. The foci are along the x. And the equation for the asymptote is very simple. Y equal plus or minus. The rise is underneath x. You really rise 4 units. And you run, what do you square to get 4? 2. So it is plus or minus 2x. Now the foci is the square root of 4 plus 6, which is radical 20. A number bigger than 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could simplify that if you wish. And there it is. If I go to part D, 3x squared minus 6y squared equal negative 9. Divide by a negative 9. X squared over 3 minus plus negative over negative. This is going to be, I'm going to write it in 2 steps. 2y squared over 3 equal a 1. Or I'm going to say negative x squared over 3 minus y squared over 3 halves equal a 1. So, what do you square to get a 3 radical 3? 1, 2, radical 3 is about right there. And square root of 1.5, a number a bit bigger than 1. You could rationalize if you want. Create the rectangular box. The negative is in front of the, the negative is in front of the x. So the center is at 0, 0. The vertices are at 0, radical 3 halves, 0, negative radical 3 halves. The foci are on the y-axis. And the equation for the asymptote, y equal plus or minus. What do you square to get that? Radical 3 over radical 2 over, what do you square to get that? Radical 3x. So that's plus or minus multiplied by the reciprocal, right? Or what is this missing to have the whole LCD? That's a radical 2. So that would be radical 3 over radical 3 radical 2. So it's really 1 over radical 2x, or simply radical 2 over 2x plus or minus. No big deal. The foci, I'm going to take the larger, the sum of those. That's, this is 6, that's 9 halves, so that's 3 over radical 2 and negative 3 over radical and it is right there. Now, given information about the graph, it's much quicker to come up with the equation. So remember, they're all centered at the origin, so they're all going to look like this. We're not sure where the negative is yet. But that's going to be the case for all of them. So that's the majority of the problem. They're not asking for a graph. So this graph is my own. I don't have to make it label and do all of that. I'm just using it for my own information to figure out how this works. So the vertices are at 4, 0. Right? Then that's not 41, that's 4 squared. And the foci are at 6, 0. So this is 6 units. If I call this a squared, if I take the square root of 16 plus a squared, I get 6. Square both sides. Subtract from both sides. There's my answer. Very simple. Here we have the vertices at 0, 6, 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 6. So it is negative and positive. 6 squared is 36. This is a squared. The foci are at 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. So that's 8 units. So we say the foci is the square root of a squared plus 36. 8 equal the square root of a squared plus 36. 64 equal a squared plus 36. A squared will equal what's 64 minus 36? 8, 28. Throw 28 in and there it is. That's if they gave me this information. That's what they can do in your homework. And here they're going to give you the equation for the asymptote. I want you to be careful. They say the vertices are at 4, 0. So pay attention. 2, 4, negative 2, negative 4. So these are the vertices. So this is a negative. This is a positive. 2 squared is a 4. I'm sorry, 4 squared is 16. Now, do not mix things up. The slope, the rise over the run, is 1 over 2. The rise is, what do you square to get a squared is a, and what do you square to get 16? A 4. Cross multiply and solve for a. So square that, you get a 4. There it is. So this is simplified. So don't go on and make the mistake of saying, oh, that must be underneath the y is a 1, underneath the y, the x is a 2. That's not true because they reduce. If you take 4, what's under y over, if you take 2 over 4, that's 1/2. It could have been any ratio that is a 1/2. Same thing with part D. The vertices are at 0, 6, 2, 4, 6. That means a negative and a positive, and we moved 6 above. 6 squared is 36. That's a squared. And we notice they have a slope of a 2/3, and the slope is you rise what's underneath x, that what underneath y, that's a 6 over a, cross multiply 2a equal 18, so a must be a 9. A squared is 81. That must be the equation for this hyperbola. And that's pretty much it for this section without any shifts or